Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Autism Podcast, the second episode of 2026. You know the drill by now, everyone who's listening. Before we get into today's episode, be sure to check out our website, www.londonautismgroupcharity.org, where you can find exclusive information about our services, the chances to volunteer, and also about all of our community cafes that are hosted all across London, that are hosted by the founders themselves, Chris Papadopoulos and James Gordon. It's a place where you can basically just be yourself. You don't have to sign up for anything. You don't have to fill in any forms. You don't have to pay nothing. You can literally just come in, have a tea or coffee, speak to the founders and other autistic people around you, and communicate, connect, all that stuff. All of that information is on our website. So please check that out. We also have an account on Instagram which is called the_autism_podcast. Please follow that if you are on Instagram and you are a regular listener. That is where you go to find behind the scenes moments. Any upcoming updates for upcoming episodes are all there. That is also produced and hosted by the charity itself. So please follow us on Instagram if you haven't already. With that said, on to today's guest, who is a Watford-based neurodiverse artist who specializes in character design, visualizing dreams and emotions. Everyone, please welcome to the stage, Vijay Panchal. Welcome. I'm really hoping I said
Great
it.
to be here, Simeon and Sophia.
And also, we can't forget my co-host, which is Sophia Christophi. How's it going?
I'm all good, Simeon. Thank you. I'm really looking forward to this episode today with Vijay. And on that note, we will let him do his introduction. So, Vijay, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what led to your autism diagnosis so that the listeners can get to know you a little bit better?
So, hi everyone, my name is Vijay. I'm from Watford and I'm a neurodiverse character artist, workshop facilitator, and public speaker. My autism journey began in 2020 when I went to my private psychiatrist from IM Psychiatry. His name is Iqbal Mohiuddin. And he said that I was showing signs of autism, but he couldn't really diagnose me with it. But in terms of ADHD, I scored 100 out of 100, really. So I got that diagnosis in 2020 for ADHD. But I wrote the reasons why I thought I may be autistic in the notes on my mobile phone. But I left pursuing this because I had loads of different health issues at the same time. So I wrote certain things that pinpointed certain symptoms that I was having, such as burnout, emotional dysregulation, sensory overload, overwhelm, and so many other things. And I was really struggling with these things at the time, but I left it. And the more I went to neurodiverse events, the more I realized and felt a sense of belonging to a tribe. And I think that one of the first events I went to was the autism show. I can't remember what year it was, but probably like 2021, 2022. And this was a pivotal point in realizing my own truth. So that was kind of the build up to the beginning of my autism journey, really.
Would you say that after getting your diagnosis, after you were told about it, did it help make sense of things, or were you still having difficulties kind of navigating life afterwards?
So post diagnosis, I gained a lot of closure from having a diagnosis. Some people might not, but I waited 2.5 years in terms of the diagnosis on the NHS on the old referral system, which was before Right to Choose. As soon as I heard about Right to Choose, I just jumped on that offer. And Problem Shared is the organization that really helped me to get to my diagnosis within 6 months, I think it was, by December 2024. And they're doing great work to counteract the influx of, the increased demands in people waiting for diagnosis. So that was a really lengthy process because of my struggles with dyslexia and forms and stuff on my side of it. But it was also hard to extract informant information from my family due to cultural stigmas and also memory issues. So my mum has bad memory issues as well. Well, I do as well myself, actually, having brain fog. So in terms of intersectional issues, there was a lack of acceptance, understanding, and obviously language barriers. So I'm British Indian. Gujarati is my native tongue, and there is no word for autism in Gujarati. So I searched on YouTube and Google and everything, and I found on YouTube a lady called Dr. Nisha Karia. She was speaking in Gujarati, so she was educating people on autism in Gujarati, and helping people to familiarize what that is. So it was a huge relief to have the diagnosis, but post-diagnosis, I had psychoeducational classes where we were in group setting and we learned the lingo. We got to speak to other people that were on the same journey and discuss different topics. I understand that through the NHS, there's limited support due to financial and infrastructure problems, but I couldn't really, post-diagnosis, I couldn't really afford neurodiverse coaching because I had all these other private medical costs to tend to, and so it wasn't really feasible. But David Gray Hammond, I don't know if you've heard of him, but
Yep, we
he
have.
is associated with LAG, and he's doing brilliant work in the fields of mental health, addiction, and neurodiversity. And he's mentored me thanks to the London Autism Group, who I call LAG anyways. And I have been connecting to various neurodiversity organizations and building my support network. But a sensory assessment is something that is quite difficult to get. I'm still pursuing that, but I'm sure the audience know how challenging that is to, get. Like I found from what I was saying with my culture and language not having a word, looking at the topic of language, what I've found through David, there's Tanya Adkin, there's Problem Shared, there's many organizations that they have words and labels for my lifelong challenges. So, for example, alexithymia, which is struggling to identify and express emotions. I didn't know this word existed, because I'm a visual person. So that having that word really helped to express myself and come to closure and understanding. There's also monotropic split, which is struggling to divide my attention on multiple tasks. There's the disability models. And there's many other terms, but exposure anxiety is probably something I feel right now, exposing something quite, vulnerable about myself. There's a friend of mine called Tim Edwards, who's from an organization called Impact 73. And he has in his manifesto how to use precise language in aiding people in expressing themselves. So I could really relate with this through my autistic struggles because I enjoy inter or multi-disciplinary conversations that are outside the box. I'm an artist, so I think outside the box. And through his movement, I became aware of different ways of adding value to organizations. So the terminology that kept coming up in his group, in Tim's group's discussions were generalism. And this is something I hadn't heard before. And, looking at my sort of spiky profile in commas, I've been working on my needs and strengths, and through my Genius Finder by Genius Within, so Dr. Nancy Doyle and her organization, they're doing brilliant work in terms of neurodiversity and employment, and that has really helped me to, pinpoint language, but also needs and strengths in terms of advocacy. And also London Autism Group have their monthly workplace sessions, which I think are brilliant as well. So I highly recommend those. There's just some other topics I want to talk about as well here in terms of diagnosis, post-diagnosis, sort of areas where I've struggled, which I feel the audience may benefit with. And masking is one of them because I've always been hiding socially unacceptable behaviors such as scripting, stimming, fidgeting. And now I'm just sort of letting masks down and, just being myself. But I think it overlaps with trauma as I have CPTSD as well. So sometimes unmasking becomes sort of a safety issue. Problem Shared again told me that my ADHD symptoms were masking my autism symptoms. And this was the first. I never heard of this before. And it can be the other way around as well, according to a lady I met at a vintage art fair. But I thought, why is this not common knowledge? So there's masking in terms of myself and society, but there's also masking in terms of the different neurodiversity or ailments that are involved. Autistic burnout, I realize I've been in perpetual crisis in my life, in my personal life. So I've chosen to put myself first and take the pressure off myself. And I think rest is a huge priority, because the symptoms of experiencing in terms of autistic burnout were extreme fatigue. I also do have chronic fatigue syndrome, so this was hard to sort of separate out. Loss of skills, sensory sensitivity, meltdowns, shutdowns, and much more. So Problem Shared taught me about prevention, and David as well, actually, through establishing better boundaries and spoon theory, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Now, I have other gray area ailments, and one of them is called Mast Cell Activation Syndrome. And this is essentially to do with the immune system, and it's about stress physiologically affecting my body through inflammation. This is how my private professor of Mast Cell Activation explained it to me. And the common example used is, if my body was a nightclub, then I would have too many bouncers. So everything would be seen as a threat. So it ties in with something called histamine and a histamine response, as I don't have the enzyme to break down histamine. Dysautonomia is another thing that's quite gray area that is unseen as well. And from the way I understand it, it basically means my nervous system is fried. So there's an obvious overlap there with trauma, CPTSD, and autistic neurology, because the nervous system is the common denominator there. I was within pre-diabetic range, and the private dietitian I was seeing was telling me that blood sugars also impact stress. So now there's an overlap with stress that I'm describing in terms of blood sugar and inflammation. So there's all these overlaps, but again, I don't feel this is all common knowledge. So the next point I have is about perspectives and reflecting and reframing my autistic identity. My goal is to reach autistic joy, and I feel like there's glimmers, which are sensory pleasures of hope. But I feel like at times I dip in and out of, for example, there's a grief cycle by Elizabeth, I think I'm saying a name right, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and it's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. So I bounce around on this scale from time to time, and I often have an unhelpful perspective where I say, I get frustrated and regret and, think, if only they caught this early, then I could have put interventions in place. But then I also think, is it natural to grieve something I never had? So I think past perspectives on the DSM, they talk about deficit and disorder, which I feel is like, I don't feel that's neuro-affirming language. I prefer that, like neurodiversity or neurodivergence. I was watching TV with my family, and it was just perfect how India's Shark Tank, it's like the Dragon Den of the UK. They had a company called AuDHD. I hope I'm saying that right, but they were creating a remote nationwide app that created autism screenings using AI and facial recognition. Now, I thought, this is amazing, first off, but why is this not a global default? I understand it's not a norm in the UK, but I understand, again, the problems of feasibility, infrastructure, policies based on the legislation of whichever country is involved. So I just thought, with all this rapid developing tech, with 5G and AI, there must be a cost-effective way of creating innovation to ensure early interventions. So, children now wouldn't suffer how I suffered in trying to get diagnosed. I'm bouncing around, but there's more things regarding sensory processing and sensory overload. As I said, I've been exploring how to get a sensory assessment. And in that, I've learned about, and through the different organizations, I've learned about proprioception, interoception, vestibular, and how they can be hyper and hypo and a mixture of all. So if anyone in your audience or yourself, you know about a sensory processing assessment, I would be really grateful because it's an area of development for me. But I know that there's overlap with things like dyspraxia and hypermobility, which I again have on my long scroll of gray area ailments. So I signpost myself daily as I have a mental health first aider certificate. I signpost myself using holistic well-being strategies, and I use prayer, mindfulness, meditation, movement, visualization, somatics. I basically amalgamate everything that I've learned and deploy it every day into my daily life because I feel like it's a maze to work out what my needs are at any given time to advocate for myself because of all the different health issues. So I seek professional help in signposting myself. And I feel like now I'm connected to a really good supportive network that's just ever growing, full of amazing people. So I think, overall, there needs to be really important societal changes that need to take in place, including interpersonal attitudes like kindness and empathy. Well, I don't know if empathy can be taught or not, but cross-cultural education, as I've alluded to with diagnosis and my personal family experience with diagnosis, reasonable adjustments for those in the workplace, all the usual stuff such as accessibility, visual cues, rest areas, and assistive technology as well, which I've mentioned. So I'm basically, in terms of diagnosis and post-diagnosis, I'm only really at the beginning of my journey. And I know sort of what pieces of information to put together, but I'm also aware there's lots of obstacles. And at the same time, though, I'm not really afraid of discomfort or pain because I've been in this position many a time before with my other health issues. So I'm just trying to play to strengths and develop myself while trying to help other people. So that's my long story on diagnosis and post-diagnosis.
I think you make a really important point when you're talking about waiting lists and post-diagnostic support and things like that. And it sounds like you've been very proactive in building that support network.
Yes, that's what I
And
think as
hopefully
well.
it helps highlight to the audience that actually, even whilst you're waiting for a diagnosis, there are places, organizations, people that you can get support from. And I think that is not very well known. I think lots of people feel that they need to have a diagnosis to access many spaces. And I think that's one of the great things about the London Autism Group charity is whether you are diagnosed, recently diagnosed, undiagnosed, and suspect you might be autistic, any of the above, we are open and you're welcome to come and learn and explore and, seek support from other people. So it would be good if there was more support in place for people whilst they're waiting for that assessment. Because as you said, you were on the list for 2.5 years. That's a really long time to not know where to go or who to speak to. And then again, post-diagnostically as well, where can people go to next? And I know Simeon and I had a conversation not long ago about how once you're diagnosed, wouldn't it be great if there was a list of neuro-affirming providers or autistic people that you can look up online to find information. So how can we signpost people to this really rich information that is available? Because I've mentioned before in a previous episode that when I was diagnosed, it was just I was handed a couple of leaflets and that was it. I was told you're autistic and I didn't really know where to go from there at all. But there is so much out there, and it sounds like you've done a really incredible job of finding those places. So I hope listeners following this episode and listening can work through some of those places that you mentioned, or at least look into them to see if it's something that they might wish to explore.
And if I'm honest, like you're a perfect example of what I keep preaching to everyone every single time, which is I'm not sure if you've listened to any of our episodes, Vijay, but like basically what I say every single time is how important it is for autistic people to understand themselves. And even in just a short amount of time that you've managed to accomplish and learn about yourself, about your limitations. I mean, there's so much things that I resonated with as well when you mentioned about how you experience alexithymia. I definitely know about that. The masking, the stimming, the fact that you're able to understand how you work based on those things. And the fact that yeah, I really love, just like what Sophia was saying as well, I love the fact that you decided to, while you were waiting, to be proactive and learn about those things as you were waiting for the diagnosis. So once you got the diagnosis, it was like, I'm already ahead of the curve now because you are in a position where it's just confirmation of things that you already know. And the fact that you mentioned that you do stuff like meditation and mindfulness, which I've also highlighted in multiple episodes about how important it is. A lot of people that I've spoken to as well that are autistic, that anytime I mention about mindfulness, a lot of the time they say that it's hard. And the fact that they can't do it because, let's just say, if they are AuDHD, for example, their autistic side is able to meditate, and then the ADHD side comes in and kind of disrupts the flow. I mean, I remember one of our previous guests said that, but me personally, I personally think that that in itself is a limitation, and you're proof of that. The fact that you're able to overcome that, and because at the end of the day, it's about learning more about yourself and not waiting on the NHS to help with that support, because unfortunately, right now, we don't have a lot of stuff in place at the moment. So rather than just sitting there twiddling your thumbs and waiting for that to come around, you thought to yourself, let me find out what I can do, what I can access in the meantime. And I really hope that a lot of our audience, and if I'm saying, guys, I really hope you take notes here, because I've said this on other episodes as well about what it happens when you're able to understand who you really are. Is that your potential starts to flourish once you understand what you're about. And of course, you might not get there straight away. It might take a while. Just obviously depends on how quickly you're able to process that information. But once you've processed it, go ahead and do it, man, because it's up from there. It's not down. Yeah, you will have struggles. You will have times when you fail. But the most important thing is to get up again and try one more time. No matter how much it takes, you will get there eventually. And I hope that you continue to flourish on your journey as well. I mean, it sounds like you're already doing that, so I don't think I even need to say this to you, but I'll just say it anyway, because it's definitely something that, I have dealt with on my journey as well.
Thank you both. A bit taken back actually of what you both have said. What I'm about to say will actually, there's a nice serendipity going on here actually, which will make sense as I talk about the art journey. But yeah, there are issues with the system, and like you were saying, Sophia, with you're diagnosed and things aren't in place. But I think we are disruptors in that sense, and this is why I love, I call it LAG, London Autism Group. Thanks to Chris and James and everyone. Everyone is welcome there, regardless of diagnosis or demographic, but we are, the change we want to see in the world. Actually, that's a Gandhi quote, actually. So that always resonated with me since I was a kid. But I agree with everything you're saying. I appreciate the compliments. So thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, no worries, man.
Joining us.
Well, first of all, I'll ask, how did you get into art? And then I'll transition that into how did you manage to contact the London Autism Group charity and then provide workshops for the charity?
I'm just trying to remember how when I first met the autism group and where it was, because I have brain fog. So I don't actually know the answer to that question.
Oh, fair
They
enough.
probably know better than I know. But yeah, I can go into the art journey if you want to know, and then the workshops if you want. Is
Yeah,
that all
no,
right?
yeah, I can do it.
So in terms of art, I always struggled to express myself since I was a kid. I was always visual, and so art became my language, my therapy, my communication, my everything. And it's always been a management strategy. And I initially started as a young kid in the classrooms. I was always the boy drawing in the corner, but I was helping my peers with their technical problems because they were coming to me and asking me, how do you do this? How do you do that? And I said this humbly, I was helping them. But as I grew older, I saw that, expression was a wider problem in society, not just through art and creativity, but like in the walk of life. So I completed my BA 2D digital animation degree at University of Hertfordshire in 2010, where I focused on communicating emotions through anthropomorphic characters. But along with this, growing up from helping people with technical problems to doing a degree in animation, I was also always fond of character design and visualizing my dreams, making the intangible tangible. How do I extrude that into reality? So I post uni in 2010, there was a recession, as you might know. So I ended up working in, retail and care and hospitality and education. And I was still focusing on art because I used to paint portraits, which you can probably see on my website. And 2012 was a very pivotal point. They were saying, "Oh, this is the end of the world" or whatever, but it was a very pivotal point for me because it actually, looking back at that year, that was what has got me to now, actually. And that was because my grandma passed away in 2012, and
Oh, sorry to hear
I
that.
was, thank you, I was working as a support worker, which I'll mention about a bit later on. But what I decided to do 2013, literally January 2013, I decided, if grandma's looking down on me, what would she want me to do? And so I went into London and I just started handing out my CV, and I got an internship at a gallery, and then I eventually started working in galleries and collaborating with creative friends who were in bands. A lot of this you can see on my website as well. And so I got receipts for everything. And yeah, as time went on, we got to 2015 where I feel my pandemic started. And I'll explain this because I, in 2015, I had my trigger event, which was food poisoning. And this is where my chronic ailments started. I had loads of cascading symptoms, which, from fatigue to pain to everything, which, have kept cascading until now, actually. So fast forwarding to 2019, the actual pandemic began. And this is where myself, like many other people, began to create a lot of artwork because obviously we were trapped indoors, etc. So this just added more fire to my creative flair, and I began to create sort of expressionistic, figurative series of artworks of predominantly, actually, I think, characters in different forms, such as on prints, and I was framing artwork ready for exhibition and T-shirts, etc. And in 2021, I exhibited in different galleries in Hertfordshire, in Watford, in, Hemel Hempstead, in different areas. And earlier I mentioned I was working in galleries in 2013. Well, Brick Lane Gallery was one of these galleries. And so in 2021, I managed to exhibit there. So a dream became true. A dream came to reality. And there's actually a pattern of this that you'll see as I'm saying certain things here. And 2022, I entered a couple of competitions and did some commissions for friends in different charitable organizations, such as Electric Umbrella. I upcycled some instruments for them, including a electric guitar, which I think they may have auctioned. I also, coming forward from 2022 to now, I created some apparel designs more recently for Differently Perfect and the Neurodiverse Pride store, which is David Gray Hammond's store that I mentioned earlier. And just recently, I finished a multimedia project, including animation, for the Thames Hospice, where I create a character asset, an elephant anthropomorphic character for something they're doing called the Trunks Across the Thames project. So I may or may not paint one of their sculptures. It's been shortlisted, but we'll see what happens with that. So that's the art journey itself.
Just curious. So you mentioned earlier that you're quite a visual thinker, and I
Yeah.
wondered if you could explain a little bit more about how that kind of shapes your work or what that experience is like.
Well, being visual is it's sort of like the epitome of being neurodiverse. It's just I see the world in a different way. I can, do you know when you go to the opticians and they put that big machine over your head and then they start putting the different lenses over your eyes and when you look through the green, they ask you, how do you see the letters? And with the green or the red, you might see the difference in how bold it is or sharp it is or blurry it is, whatever. This is how I see the world. I can put the lenses of trauma on right now. I can put the lens of neurodiversity on. I can put, from all the knowledge that I've accumulated, I can put different lenses on. Even from a empathic standpoint, I can get into a person's shoes as well, but visually. And I can go into the different visual dimensions of where my imagination lies and where the inspiration comes from. My dreams, I've used them in art. My imagination, as I said earlier, it's about making the intangible tangible and extruding out ideas from intangible places, So, for example, this is what I show at workshops if I'm telling someone about art, is that this house that I'm in or the chair that I'm sitting on was an idea in someone's head. And then they extruded that from their mind using the materials into reality. And I look at like churches where London Autism Group is held, or, I think, how do they make this, But they essentially use the patterns from nature, like the Fibonacci sequence. I don't know if you've heard of this.
I have, yeah.
Or, symmetry, or, these, the veins of a tree, the roots of a tree. They use the nature and the elements to extrude out what they were seeing in their minds. And this is what I see in my mind. I see visual things. Some people in the London Autism Group are so musically talented. I can't read music, but they can hear a riff and replicate it, or some people are amazing at dance or landscaping or chefs. And, I feel that's all art. Art is about justification and observation. It's not just what someone might traditionally think of as, oh, this is a hyper-realistic picture of a tiger, so this is art. No, art is, I think, conceptual, and art can be life. So I've kind of rambled on there with that, but it's a very broad question when it comes to art. Art is life, and it can be anything. It's just justification, I think.
I love that.
I guess one thing I want to ask you just to follow up on that is because one thing I'm detecting from everything that you're saying is just the how passionate you are about your art creations and everything. And I just wanted to find out in the society that we live in, and because this is something I kind of struggle with at the moment as well, so I'll just be honest, is how was you able to, you know, venture into the art world when everything in society lets you know that, for example, there's probably a lot of people in your life who's probably said, art's probably not the way because it's not something that is the most tangible thing. How did you manage to not only, I guess, ignore those things, but still manage to kind of get that motivation to, you know, put your full creativity into your art pieces and then share that with so many different organizations?
Well, I can't be anything but I am. I'm born to stand out, not fit in. You know,
Oh, that's a great line.
I do actually struggle with a lot of, even now, there's a lot of judgments. There's a lot of, because you got to remember where the system, not the world, the system is running on a medical model. It's not running on a social model and the other models. So, you know, that being neurodiverse, it's like, for me, it's like I'm going to use visual metaphors, right? It's like a salmon swimming upstream for me initially. It's been like that. And but then I've eventually, as I've shifted my perspective, I've just said, whatever, this is me. You can take it or leave it. I'm creative, I'm visual, and this is who I'm going to be because I can't be anything else but who I am. I can't. It's like a tiger wanting to take off its stripes. It can't take off the stripes. A tiger is a tiger, and it lives in the environment that it's supposed to live in, right? Where it thrives, and its prey can't see when it's coming. But the example, Simeon, that you just gave is like a tiger just been thrown into a city, and it stands out. But a tiger's a tiger, you know. Tiger's born the same way, right? So I'm not saying I'm a tiger. I'm just saying I do love big cats. But you know, we are what we are, and I think it's more to do with the systems, the system or the systems that need to sort of be adjusted slightly to embrace neurodiversity. Because with diversity, that's where you get growth in nature, is where there's diversity. Where there isn't diversity, there's no growth. So hopefully that answers the question.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, the fact that I've said this on past episodes as well, the fact that in order for growth to happen, just like what you're saying, there needs to be different people. So the fact that difference isn't embraced by society is mind-boggling to me. Because if you think about it, the greatest minds or the greatest pioneers in our lives, whether it's through art, music, entertainment, science, all that sort of stuff. All of those people, even the people that who invented everything that we use now, those were all at one point different ideas, and it was a complete outlier from the status quo. And all the people that basically laughed at the inventors or the pioneers of music and stuff. We use that stuff today. That has now become the status quo in a lot of cases. Like the computer that we're all using right now, that was an idea in someone's mind at one point. And guarantee you, when that person came up with the idea to a bunch of other people that had no idea what that was about, obviously had a lot of backlash. But obviously, all of that has now come into fruition all these years later. So it's such a surprise to me how even after everything that's come in, even the fact that AI is now a massive thing right now, the fact that there are still so many people that just don't embrace difference really just doesn't make sense. And I personally just believe, just based on that, I personally think that everyone that's listening just needs to understand that since us autistics are different in society, rather than succumbing to the negative narratives that are always plastered with us, ignore those narratives and understand that you are able to change the way that we think in society. You listening right now, the one that's scared to go somewhere because you might be judged or anything like that, just listen to what Vijay just said just now. You have the potentially to be the next pioneer in society that, yeah, okay, you might be laughed at first, but 20 years down the line, you will be the person that created that new thing. Just think like that. And I believe that if more of us think like this is what will bring change to autism in itself, and how autistic people are viewed. We will no longer be quote unquote weirdos. All these negative stigma that is around autism probably won't even be there anymore if we just all band together.
100% with you. I just thought of all these names in my head, like Einstein. They said he might be neurodiverse. E equals MC squared. I was thinking of Tesla, Basquiat. They all, outwardly they all look. People have the judgments and this and that. They went through their adversity, but they were pioneers. They were geniuses. And
Yeah.
there's so many geniuses. I mean, let's just stick with London Autism Group. There are some serious geniuses in that group, yourselves included. So I totally agree with you, 100%.
Because I don't know how many autistic people you've spoken to in the community cafes, but I'm speaking to a lot of autistic people now. And I can understand why, but at the same time, it saddens me that there's so many people that just doubt themselves. And these are some people who can really do some next level things, but they downplay it and think it's not a big deal. Like I still remember this one person who was able to completely restore furniture when it's completely destroyed. And this person was able to completely restore it and make it look like it's brand new. But at first, when this person first came to the charity and showed me the picture of what they were able to restore, thought it wasn't a big deal. I believe it took someone like me or anybody else to be like, what are you talking about? This is an amazing thing that you've done because not everyone is able to do that.
I think it's really difficult when, as an autistic person, if you've experienced lots of negative comments about things that you're interested in or things that you like doing, it's really hard not to eventually internalize those. And I think that's where lots of people doubt how good they are at things because actually they've probably been told more times that they're not so good at things rather than how brilliant they are in other areas. So I really like what you said earlier around, taking that strengths-based approach and thinking about the things that you're good at and harnessing those skills as well. And that's not to say that there are not challenges. There can absolutely be challenges as well. But neurodivergent people can be amazing at a whole range of things. And I think giving, especially children and young people, the opportunity to explore that is so important for how they then go on to see themselves and their self-esteem and their sense of identity.
I personally do believe that it also comes down to the support that's around you as well. Your support system is 100% essential in recognizing your potential. Because, yeah, I'm pretty sure all three of us have all struggled with negative narratives, and we've internalized that. But all it takes is just, even if it's just one person, to just disrupt that by saying, ignore everyone who says that you can't do it because I believe that you can do it. So because I believe you can do it, you can do it. And it's just, I personally just believe it's in those moments to focus on the people that know and care about you. And because if they see your potential, then you can definitely see your own potential. And obviously, I understand that's definitely easier said than done. Trust me, I know. But it can be done. I mean, Vijay, you proof of that.
Thanks. I just love what you're saying. I can so resonate with imposter syndrome is essentially what you're talking about, and self-worth, self-esteem. Me, myself, I've really, really struggled and been to some very dark places due to isolation from chronic health issues, that whole gray area, because I present myself when people look at me, they don't, because I'm masking everything, you can't tell what's going on. But also, I think on the outside looking in from judgments as well from people, um, yeah, it can really knock on the negative narrative, can knock on your self-esteem and your self-worth, and your sense of safety. But I think it's really crucial. So the passion you were talking about in terms of me, I am very passionate, but I think it's very crucial to work on yourself every day. Like, because you may be in a point where you feel no one believes in you or, likes you or whatever, you're isolated. It's very common, actually. I haven't spoke to a lot of people. But I think if you just close your eyes, take a breath, and check into yourself, and reflect on who you truly are. It's not the negative thoughts that are ruminating in your head. You have, like we mentioned earlier, the gifts. How do some people like restore this furniture that you're talking about, Simeon? Like, I think that's an art form in itself. We're gifted, but I think again, it's the system. I think I'm not trying to make it the scapegoat, but the system. I don't think we'd be having this conversation actually if the system For example, we had post-diagnosis support in place from university, for example. And I think trauma goes parallel with this as well, actually. A lot of trauma is created from not accepting how diverse someone is. Oh, this person's yellow, so I can't associate with them, and we're the pink gang, and vice versa. Like it's all divisive. Instead, like LAG and many other organizations, we just come together, help each other, reach out, throw that starfish back in the sea, and then that starfish is going to tell all the other starfish in its own way about LAG and every other positive organization that there is. So totally with you both on that, what you said.
One thing I wanted to bring up about when you said about trauma and stuff is, I mean, yeah, it 100% does play a role, and society does play a role. But this is one thing that I made a video about this on Guided Neurons. Oh, by the way, subscribe, shameless plug. Okay. But which is how long are you gonna let that trauma run your life? Which is, again, I understand that there are some traumas that I've experienced that not many people are able to experience. And I know for a fact that there's definitely been people who have experienced trauma that's way more severe than me. So I'm not gonna say that you are using your trauma as an excuse. That's not what I'm saying. But the thing is that we can't control, unfortunately, what's thrown at us. I've said this before, but we do have control of how we react to it. And I know that a lot of the times when, let's just say, we get PTSD over something that we had a traumatic experience on, it's like our mind takes a screenshot of that particular moment, that traumatic moment. So anything that remotely comes close to that, it's like we go right back to that particular moment where it happened and we act the same way. But one thing that we need to understand, this is why I think mindfulness is very important and being aware, is that sometimes, if not all the time, we tend to think that that exact moment is happening, and we don't realize that that traumatic thing that happened in the past isn't happening now. It's just our brain cannot tell the difference. That's the power of the subconscious mind, unfortunately. It can't tell the difference about what's real and what's imagined. A lot of the time when we go through, let's just say, an anxiety attack or PTSD, we believe that exact moment is happening because that's what our mind tells us, but that's not what's actually happening. So if we react in a different way, if we're aware enough, and if we work on our awareness to understand the differences, we can come out of that trauma and we can somehow overcome it. There's definitely ways to do it. It's difficult, I know, but there is a way. And I just think if we just continue to learn about ourselves more and take those, let's say, those traumatic moments as lessons, as stepping stones, as learning curves, we will be on a much better path to getting to that area where those traumatic moments don't even affect us anymore. I have proof of that because I have had traumatic experiences that I no longer experience. There's still traumatic experiences, don't get me wrong, but I'm working on myself every day.
I think the relationship between autism and trauma is poorly understood. And I think there's kind of a few reasons for that. I think one is to do with how autistic or neurodivergent people process trauma anyway. So things like you just mentioned, for many of us with that visual memory, with that detailed memory, when a traumatic event happens and we have that snapshot, we tend to remember things in great detail, and that may have an impact. But also going back to what Vijay was saying earlier around waiting lists for diagnosis, post-diagnosis, just being autistic in a non-autistic world can be a traumatic experience. And I think they're things that people don't necessarily always consider. Then there's kind of the flip side to that as well, where you have people who are neurodivergent, but because they've experienced trauma, they may not get a diagnosis because now it's difficult for people to separate what's trauma and what's autism, when actually we know that autistic people are more likely to experience trauma. So, how do you tease those apart? So, I think understanding and support for autistic people who have also experienced trauma is lacking. And I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in this area.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. I think it's like a Venn diagram with lots of overlapping and interconnecting sections. And I would actually like to. This is a good point to plug in the workshop stuff actually, because with the visual, uh, what you're talking about, Sophia, with the visual, how do I word this? If you're neurodiverse and visual and you're traumatized, then you can really visually go back to the traumas. And I'm not an art therapist, but the workshops I've been doing, I feel have been helping people to express themselves. So I've been, so kind of paralleling with all the autism story and the art story, the workshop story kind of overlaps this as well. I always wanted to help people using my art as a kid. And remember, I told you about 2012 when my grandma passed away and how it was such a pivotal point. Well, in terms of serendipity, I mean, I just can't make this up because I just happened to be a support worker at a residential living service in Garston, and I was facilitating sessions on emotion, therapeutic sessions on emotion and art. Um, and I didn't know I was autistic at the time or ADHD or anything. So it was kind of like a premonition in a sense, if that makes sense. Like they also gave me an option to be funded for studying an MA in art therapy. But obviously, as I said, my grandma passed away and I went into the gallery work. But fast forwarding to 2020-23, like that's where I did the Hatch Enterprise Launchpad program, where I got to develop my idea of facilitating art well-being workshops, and specifically using character design, because I think characterization is something very relatable in neurodiversity from the workshops that I've done. But that's a segue into a separate conversation. So it was a kind of natural pivot from creating art and framing it and putting it in a gallery to turning it into a service, because this way I could, teach someone to fish and they can catch their own fish, if that makes sense. But delivering the workshops, I wasn't actually teaching anyone anything. They were teaching me. The students are always the teachers as opposed to the facilitators being teachers, if that makes sense. So now I've accumulated about 14 years on and off unknowingly of experience of facilitating art wellbeing workshops, and shared that with thousands of participants, humbly speaking, with varying needs and varying demographics. And obviously some of the workshops with London Autism Group, the main actually place where I did them was a festival called Parallel Windsor, which is still running every year in July. And there's also other organizations such as AIM, Second Voice, etc., which you can all find on my website. But I think it is an art therapy, as I said, but I think the reason I developed this idea, because I just saw, as I mentioned earlier, I was a child helping people and children to solve technical problems. Then I saw a societal problem of expression. Then I thought, okay, let's create a product, and that can bring a joy into someone's life. They see this piece of artwork. But as it pivoted into becoming a workshop, it's now, they can create their own artwork. Maybe they're feeling sad and they don't need to sit there and go into their trauma, because as I said, I'm not an art therapist, but they could paint a happy sunset and, it's helped them with the day, which is kind of like what I do with my artwork myself. It really helps me to regulate and express myself. And as I said, it's always been my therapy. So yeah, I just thought that kind of linked with what you were saying regarding visuals and trauma. So thought it was a good time to throw that in there.
Yeah, mate, one thing I've noticed with you, right, is you're very good with analogies. Like 100%. You're very good at
Thank,
like comparing and giving analogies, man. But so yeah, that's a very good way to sum that.
Yeah.
thank you. Visual metaphors.
I was just thinking as well, do you think that everyone has the ability to be creative? So,
Yes.
for example, if I were to come to one of your workshops, I really like the idea of being creative, but I really struggle to not get so into my head about it and make it look perfect and follow rules and have it in a particular way that that kind of stops me from doing any sort of creative activity. So, what sort of advice would you give to someone who's neurodivergent but maybe struggles to connect with that kind of creativity?
So actually, this has happened time and time again. So you were talking earlier of the negative the negative inner critic, the internal conversation. So 99% of the time, I would say I'm successful in terms of facilitating, but there will always be the child that is running around, can't regulate, bless them. Or, there's been several other challenges. Well, I don't expect anyone to be able to draw or create anything when they come to the workshop. A lot of the time, participants can just sit there and talk and just be. That's a win, really, because in that facilitate the safe space for people to just be and express in however way they wish. Now, there have been some participants who have turned up and haven't been prepared, and they haven't, they're short of sight, or you know, they there might be things such as PDA, where they're not going to do the task at hand, but the parents want them to create something. But as I said, in most of the cases, and there's also an example of I think it's called a fantasia, where you can't visualize something in your mind. I think that's what it's called. Don't quote me on that one. But even still, in all those cases, um, those individuals have managed to create artwork. They had the voice in their head. They had a visual or impairment or physical disability, or they couldn't regulate or be still, but they found their own way. One time there was a child that said, I have worksheets that I put out, and they just, said, no, I'm not doing it your way. They got the glitter and they used the glitter to create the line, which I was just amazed, because I hadn't seen that before. So, yeah, I think regardless of what one might say, I can't draw, I can't do it. I really believe that isn't who we truly are. And it shows up when those people themselves at the end of the workshop, whether it's a child, an elderly person, whatever demographic, they look at me and they're smiling. And I tell them, thank you, teacher. It's not me that's the teacher. It's you've just shown me something that you can overcome your own adversity that you're going through. So, yeah, I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, there's a really lovely section on your website where you have photos of people who have seen their own art. So I would definitely recommend that you check that out. There's something really heartwarming about seeing people's reactions to their own work. And I think it's really nice that you've captured that and put those on your website. The website will be in the description.
Thank
So
you.
you'll be able to go and check out some of Vijay's work.
I wanted to ask a follow-up question just on what you said, Sophia, about the people that aren't who doubt themselves, who say that they're not creative, and they say that they can't draw, they can't do that stuff, that come to your workshop. Do you believe that some of it is due to a combination of fear and being out of their comfort zone?
Well, when someone says to me, I'm not creative, automatically, and they will follow up by saying, I can't draw something realistic, or, like they have a connotation or idea in their mind of what art is or what creativity is. But as I mentioned earlier, art is life. Art can be anything. Art can be justified. It can be a language. It can be a therapy. It can be communication. It can be whatever you want it to be. If you break down the that word and what it means, so I think it's the sort of, misconceptions initially people have. So once you break it down and you kind of face yourself, you can then, so if you know that art is, it can be anything, then you can create anything. You can use the glitter. You can, in my specific workshop where I do, they can use the glitter, they can collage, they can draw line, but it can expand out to, if we're just having a general conversation here, of someone saying to themselves, I can't create anything. I'm not going to be able to do anything today. I'm not going to be able to do any creativity today whatsoever. But they might go to the kitchen and, they say, I can't cook. I'm not going to be able to cook. The mind's just, attacking them. But then they might pick up something and, mold some chapatis out of some dough, or, and maybe the chapatis were square. They weren't circular, but they still made something. They still created something. They were still co-creative or creative. It might be with DIY. I might have in my mind, I need to make something to put up my flower pot, but I don't think I could do it, and then I managed to do it. I just improvise. I'm in the flow state. So in terms of neurodiversity, a lot of the amazing things happen in flow state, where you're free from all the judgments and you just go with the flow and you're creating. You're in flow state. I'm sure, Simeon, when you're making the music, for example, that you said, or editing videos or whatever it is you're doing, Sophia, I'm not sure what it is you're doing creatively, but whatever it is, it could be gardening. Once you kind of go into it, you come out of your mind, and I think you come into the heart. I think that's what happens, and that's where I feel like the beauty happens. So I think this is the big challenge, is overcoming the mind. And with neurodiversity, it's just always overactive. So sorry, I'm waffling on, but that's what I had to say about that.
No, no, it's fine. Like, I'm smiling right now because you sound a lot like my friend who so he says exactly the same kind of things. I'm like, it's like I'm talking to him right
Got to
now.
meet him.
Wait, yeah. If I'm honest, if you meet and you and him might have a conversation for like 3 hours. So I
Oh,
can see
awesome. Awesome.
it.
That's another podcast then.
Yeah.
Sorted.
So I guess one thing I wanted to touch on as well, because you this was very early now when you mentioned this, but how in Gujarati there is no word for autism, and that reminds me of remember Sophia Aditi, like
Yeah.
it reminds me a lot of her because
Who,
we had
sorry?
a so Aditi Gungrade
Aditi. Okay. Yeah,
of
yeah.
much spectrum. She runs this organization in India. She was a guest on the podcast a year ago now. Was it a year ago?
Yeah, it would have
Yeah.
been about a year ago.
Yeah, so she was basically saying the same thing that you were saying about how much of a struggle it is to define what autism is over there. And I just wanted to know, did you have any of those kind of struggles in your family background based on the fact that you weren't able to maybe discuss what autism is in your family? Because I don't know if any of your other family members are autistic. I mean, I just wanted to find out if that was a similar thing.
Did you say artistic or autistic?
Autistic.
Autistic. Yeah, it's a current problem. It's a current cultural problem that's occurring. So within the immediate family, extended family, community. So obviously there's no language, there's no word for it. So one of the closest words in my language that comes towards, well, I don't think it's close at all, to be honest, but people use it to describe autism is called Mansik. Mansik, from my understanding, is a sickness of the mind. Now, that does not explain autism to me.
Mm.
So what I find is, in terms of the language, I speak broken Gujarati. So my mom's actually from Kenya. My dad's from India, Gujarat. So I unknowingly have put Swahili words into, I speak a mix of Swahili and Gujarati together, if that makes sense. So I have to sort of, if I use a metaphor again, in art, there's a thing called negative space. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's where you, instead of drawing the line, you would draw the negative space, the black space. Say if you're drawing a table, you wouldn't draw the table with a line. You would draw the black, you would blot out the black space around the table to get the inverse, the sort of mask, so to speak, as you would see in Photoshop or Illustrator, to get the silhouette of a table. And this is what I feel like in terms of language is how autism is described, definitely in my language, Gujarati, and I'm sure with other the similar sort of derivatives of Sanskrit like Punjabi and Hindi and stuff. So yeah, it's a challenge. There's stigmas, there's taboo, there's superstition. There's so many different areas of where there's a lack of understanding. There's lack of acceptance, but there's a lack of, if there is acceptance, there's a lack of understanding. And I'm personally experiencing that myself. And so this leads to toxicity. But I feel like if you have awareness, well, I think the first step is if the person cares enough to want to understand you. So there you know where to pick your battles. If the person doesn't want to understand you, then I think it's better to have boundaries in place. But if the person or the organization, even I'd say here, if there's an acceptance, then there can be understanding, which can be developed. But then there needs to be language used in place. And then you can eventually get to advocacy. So I'm in a constant sort of influx of like trying to educate people, but I use my visual metaphors because they aren't certain words and situations. So hopefully that answers what you're saying, Simeon.
It does, yeah. It's definitely a struggle to kind of express yourself to your family who probably doesn't because there's no word for it. I guess it must be very difficult trying to truly be yourself because they're just gonna look at you, not truly understand what you're going through, and I guess because you're not able to really even describe it as well, it makes it more difficult, would you say?
Yeah, that's it. That's 100%. But I would also throw in, going back to trauma actually here, I'd throw in generational trauma as well. Like I think my family and my ancestors, my grandparents, my parents, they've seen wars, they've seen poverty, they've seen, they've had to flee countries and things, and they've had to slave to. My ancestors were railroad workers, blacksmiths, etc. So, how can you have awareness when you can't be educated? And at the time, there wouldn't have been any education on university as well, actually, for example, or trauma, or anything else that's all grey area right now. So I think, what I try to do is actually see, this is going to sound strange, but I see people as children. If, family members, like let's say grandparents or uncles or whatever, I'll see them as children because they never had the opportunities that I had, for example, to develop emotional awareness. So how can therefore is it fair for me to expect them to understand? So then that takes a lot of weight out of the situation and lightens the situation, actually, if that makes sense. But I'll still go about my way to help those that wish to be supported. So
I think
Uh,
it can also be difficult because we know that neurodivergence runs in families. So for some people, they are undiagnosed neurodivergent themselves. And it may be that they don't have an understanding of what they're experiencing either. But I imagine it's a really kind of unique situation not to have a word. I'm trying to, and I remember when we spoke to Aditi as well about this, I was trying to imagine how I would go about having the conversations that I have now about autism and all of the things that come along with it without having a word for it. And it's really, really difficult. And I guess over time, there's a hope that language will develop. There will be a word for it. It's going to take a while for that language to emerge and then for it also to match the sort of language that we use now. So that kind of neuro-affirming approach, strengths-based approach, for all of those kind of things to develop along the way as well.
I think it's means for creative innovation. We just got to make a word up, you know. But I speak broken Gujarati, so I need to kind of like dive into it. I need someone who's like a specialist in speaking Gujarati, and then I can create a word and then just spam everyone with it or something. But I did hear that, I can't remember. Don't quote me on this again. If it was I don't know where I heard, but some culture recently coined a term for autism in their culture. I don't know if it was Somali or Ethiopian or something. I can't remember exactly, but I saw it somewhere recently. But so I'm just using that as a hopeful example of there can be developments. If there's a gap, then you just got to develop a niche. So it's opportunity. It depends on perspective, I guess, isn't it? So
All right, so Vijay, so before we end this podcast, I would like to find out what your special interests are.
So aside of everything that I've described in the art, I've actually, they say autistic people can't develop new interests. Well, I did develop an interest in data science and machine learning and AI over the last couple of years through off the back of the launchpad I did with Hatch Enterprise. There's something there which they call due diligence, which is the customer discovery process, where you basically trying to get from um, your product to your paying customer. And I found that qualitative, quantitative analysis process really interesting. So I just been, remotely studying data science, and I did an internship with one of the mentors from Hatch as well, actually. But I found the thing that really interested me about that was the patterns and systems. Like I can actually read code and stuff, and so that's one interest. Another interest that you can probably tell is animal behavior or animals. And since I was a kid, I've always been interested in animals. I mean, I was scared of animals initially, actually, but it became even more fascinating through, as I mentioned, my animation degree, where I created my dissertation was how to communicate emotions through anthropomorphic characters. So I had to study books on animal behavior, and I created animation actually that was there wasn't any dialogue in it. It was just kind of like a Tom and Jerry style slapstick animation about a dove and a pigeon falling in love, and the pigeon was helping the dove to flee from her owner, who's our old man, who's captured in a cage. So yeah, animal behavior, and I love animals, especially big cats, because I feel animals are like so congruent, and in terms of neurodiversity, they're literal, and like where you stand with them. For example, I've looked after some cats, and like they will bother with you when they want to bother with you, and if they don't want to bother with you, they won't bother with you. I just find that so much easier than certain people that I may have to deal with. So I love animals. And the last sort of special interest, it kind of overlaps with what we're talking about, is holistic health. So, as a kid, aside from the drawing, one of the first things my dad did is show me yoga, show me how to do yoga, and like push-ups, but yoga style, and, all this stuff, and, meditating and breathing. And even now he's actually going on about it every day, though I deploy that anyways. And since I got unwell in 2015 with the food poisoning and the chronic health issues started, I then became even more fascinated with holistic health, because naturally I was going to so many different hospitals for appointments. So I looked at conventional, alternative, and complementary healthcare, and then actually did some courses. So in 2018, I did a holistic health practitioner course, which got me some CPD points, which was very interesting. And I've just actually today completed level 2 of this program called the Primal Trust, which is Dr. Cat in America. And I feel that that's really helped me with my holistic well-being, having chronic health issues. So I'm on to the 3rd level of that. And I'm also actually doing a course on PDA, so pathological demand avoidance, or as some people like to call it, persistent drive for autonomy. So I'm near the end of that as well, actually. So I'm constantly learning, but I'm at a point now where I'm not pressuring myself to overachieve. It's just like I'm learning because I'm actually genuinely fascinated, and it's actually because I want to signpost myself to the appropriate care, but also I'm meeting so many people in crisis all the time. Public transport. I often find myself having to utilize all my amalgamated learnings in real time in a crisis situation. So it's like it's so important because another thing that was a pivotal point in my life, which I mentioned as well, is in 2022 when my friends passed away, and I don't know the reason why he passed away, but I can assume what it was. And so this is why I take actually advocacy, and as I said at the beginning, that I advocate for intersectionality, hidden disabilities, neurodiversity, and suicide prevention. I think is just so paramount because in line with what you said earlier, Sophia, and yourself, Simeon, with trauma and neurodiversity as well. Like, the stats on suicide, the 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 high. I don't know if this is exact, but it's the majority is men aged 18 to 45. I think it is. That's the initial demographic, but within that, you've got the LGBTQAI community. I don't know what the exact numbers of that, and then within that, there's the autistic community. But again, the numbers, the data and the science, like a lot of these things I've been talking about, is not really available. And so I just do what I can in the situations that I go into to use my interest in holistic health, animal behavior, data, and it might seem these things are all separate, but everything is sort of quantum entangled, so to speak. Everything, when you unpack something, you see similarities with one thing to another thing, if you can grasp the system or the symbology in it. So that's what my interests. They are kind of related to what I've spoke about, but yeah, that's what I'm interested in.
If I'm honest, that's probably the most unique special interest we've had when it comes to the guests to date. I think, so there's 100% great. And man, one thing I agree with you, couldn't agree with you more, is when you mentioned about how autistic people can't have new interests. Like, yeah, I definitely agree with that, man. Because like for such a long time, I thought that my interests were set in stone, and there was no way I could know new interests. Like just recently, I got into like badminton and then badminton stringing. Like so, string actually putting the strings on rackets and stuff. I got into that recently, and once again, that was just an idea that my friend gave to me once because he saw that I was so interested in strings and just the different attributes that each string can have. Anyone who knows that not all strings are the same. They all have different attributes with different play styles and everything like that. So he just came to me one day and said, "Why don't you just learn how to actually string these rackets rather than just constantly watching videos?" And at first I was like, I don't know, because it's not something that I can see myself doing. It looked very, very hard. And then after a while, I guess of actually watching videos of people doing it, I started realizing, it's actually something that I actually wouldn't mind doing. Yeah. Fast forward, I now have a stringing machine. I'm actually stringing rackets now. So, but like the thing is that the only reason why I tell that story is because it, the reason why doubted that at first was it was once again the fear of the unknown, being outside of my comfort zone. And I realized that's what unfortunately a lot of autistic people fall under, that where they feel like their comfort zone keeps them safe but instead keeps them stuck. You're not able to grow stuff. So I'm really glad that you said that because we 100% can.
Yeah, I agree. And when we do, we learn it in great detail as well. And I think that's what I love about the autistic community and special interests is that when we become interested in something, we really learn everything about it. And I'm pleased that you've taken up your new special interest, Simeon. It sounds like that's a really unique thing to do as well. I've never even considered that, there's a whole process to that. So I hope that brings you some joy.
Oh, it does.
Yeah,
It does.
that's the best thing about special interests.
Yeah. And if I'm honest, like the whole data stuff and the holistic health, especially, that is definitely a very, very wholesome and heartwarming interest. And I really do hope that you go further in that, because yeah, it's tough having I can see it's tough losing someone like that, man. It just it's yeah. It's definitely a hard thing for everyone involved, not just for the person who's feeling that way.
Well, the key is to notify, you know, the medical services, the police, if you can see someone is not feeling quite hopeful. That's the key. Just you. It's not something where the I or you can help them. If there's no hope, then they need to be ushered to specialist services. But I love what you said there. Just going back on, I didn't see it like that. You know, the the developing new interest, but the avoidance topic you just mentioned, because that's the avoidance topic is what I feel underpins a lot of neurodiversity, PDA. There's elements of that in I'm doing the autistic thing of joining dots here. You know, I think that's something I find myself actually by default avoiding things, but I check into what is the resistance in each moment. Even coming onto here, there was some resistance, but I checked in, did some mindful meditation, and then it was that comfort and ease to co-create. And you know, we're extruding out this conversation into reality. So it's just I'm just really grateful to be part of it. And thank you for this opportunity. Honestly, thanks to Lag, thanks to you, Chris, James, everyone.
We're really glad that you came on, man. It's definitely been a very enlightening and eye-opening conversation we've had today. When you say, Sophia?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you, Simeon. I've really enjoyed having you on as our guest today. You're a very interesting person, and it's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you. And now we've got to meet in
Yeah,
person.
we got to meet in person, 100%.
Brilliant.
Because this is what happens when you this is a perfect example again of what happens when you learn to understand yourself, man. Your potential is inside of you and it's up to you to find it. Hopefully you have people in your life that can support you and see that potential, because that really does help as well, because it's not easy when it's just you. If there's other people around you and they are telling you to go outside of your comfort zone because that's where your potential is, listen. It's very difficult to listen. I know, because Vijay said it with the resistance and everything, but it's worth it. 100%. But thank you, Vijay, for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure, just like Sophia said. And just remember, everyone, Vijay's website will be in the description below. So if you do want to check out his workshops, it will be there. It's been some great stuff. I've definitely looked into it. And yeah, I'm with you on that one, Sophia. The parts where other people were seeing their creations, it was definitely a sight to behold, just knowing that they done something. The links will be in the description alongside all of our other links to the podcast and the Instagrams and stuff like that. It's all there. So thank you all for listening today. Thank you, Vijay, for coming on once again. And remember, stay blessed and keep expanding.